American-based and invented products to make sure that we've got the infrastructure to grow in the 21st century. We inherited a tremendous infrastructure in this nation after the war. But that infrastructure that was built in the 50s and 60s is badly aging.
Now that's all well and good. You're getting off track. You're sidetracking in order to run out the clock. That's fairly clever.
And what policies are going to create jobs.
Now the Congressional Budget Office.
What experience I had that's related to creating jobs. I've got hands-on experience.
The Congressional Budget Office is the one who says we've lost $2.5 million. So
in his own words, if you read the report,
in his own words, if you want more of the same,
by the market collapse that occurred because of wild
Democratic
and
policies that have made
Ms. O'Donnell, your understanding of what caused the collapse in our economy is fundamentally unsound.
Now,
it was wild deregulation of Wall Street that led to the collapse of our economy.
Isn't creating an air filtration system an economic stimulus in itself? Doesn't it ensure at least the security of some jobs?
It has not. You're talking about the stimulus that was
I mean, in general, things like an air filtration system.
If a company does that, they have shareholders that can invest. It is not the taxpayer's responsibility to prop up corporations. The taxpayers give their money to the federal government for a very limited role. Now, as my opponent has so proudly admitted, excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. Will you please let me finish?
Let's do this, because clearly you're both interrupting each other, and I understand why. It's a heated debate. You take about another minute. I'm going to give Mr. Coons another minute. Then we're going to move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you want more of the same, if you want more corporate bailouts and failed stimulus bills that have cost $2.5 million, then vote for my opponent, who is reiterating that he will rubber stamp the Reid-Obama agenda. But it is clearly not working. We need economic policies that will immediately jumpstart the economy, that will immediately see real job creation based on private business, not government handout. The overreaching arm of the federal government is way too big, way too far. Now, if a business has an innovative idea, then they should be able to attract investors. This is called the free market. That's how it works. It's not up to the taxpayers, especially in this economy, to pick and choose which corporation gets to succeed. I don't buy this too big to fail mentality. I don't think the government should be dictating what kind of salaries executives get, should be buying out corporations. We took over GM, and GM still closed their plant. It didn't help the Delaware taxpayers who paid for that.
Let's do 60 seconds to Mr. Coon, and then we'll move on to another question.
Thank you, Peter. My opponent repeatedly weighs in against the overreaching arm of the federal government. The federal government provides critical support in the short term and the long term for our economy and its competitiveness, whether it's the Export-Import Bank, the Department of Commerce's export promotion programs, the Small Business Administration, or lots of other things that our federal government does to constructively support capital formation, market exploration, infrastructure, or exports. I believe that the federal government can and should play a critical role in supporting and sustaining innovative, creative companies that are the key to growing our way out of this recession. My opponent makes it clear she doesn't understand capital formation, the appropriate role of the federal government in helping to grow our economy, or the very real potential for Delaware to benefit from a number of the policies that I'm advocating. Last, my opponent in her tax policy says she will not close the tax loophole that provides incentives for American companies to ship jobs overseas. Her position is clearly different from mine on that. I will end that practice and make sure that we reward and invest in those companies that are growing invention and manufacturing here in Delaware and here in the United States. I can't draw a clear contrast for you in our views about what should happen going forward.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Coons. Coming up near 9 o'clock here on 1150 AM, WDEL. Again, you're listening to live coverage of a debate between the U.S. Senate candidates in Delaware, Republican Christine O'Donnell, Democrat Chris Coons. Live for Widener University School of Law. Our panelists this morning, Mark Nardone from Delaware Today, Tamala Edwards from ABC 6 Action News, WDEL's own Alan Ludell, and Chad Livengood from the News Journal, and Tamala Edwards. The floor is yours.
All right, we've talked a lot about economic policy in the last few minutes. I'd like to take a turn to social policy, because when you look at Delaware to be such a small state, some stats jump out at you. This state has the 5th highest AIDS rate in the nation and the 6th highest teen birth rate in the nation. What would you as a senator do to fight those statistics?
I think we probably start with Mr. Coons this time.
Yes.
One of the things about the Affordable Care Act that I support is its significant increase in the role and the investment in preventive care, in wellness, and in community health centers. There is a critical role in the nonprofit sector and in the federally funded healthcare sector for outreach and education. HIV/AIDS is a terrible disease that has affected millions of Americans, and we need to push back, both against ignorance and against lack of appropriate education. Beginning at an early age, families and children need the tools to educate their children and to protect themselves and to have access to confidential and broad testing to make sure that those who are at risk of contracting HIV/AIDS and those that are living with HIV/AIDS have the resources and the support that they need. There's also innovative and appropriate programming that we can provide to reduce both teen pregnancy and low birth weight children. Several administrations here in our state have made real progress in addressing the issue of teen pregnancy and low birth weight babies, and I look forward to addressing that further in the cross discussion.
Ms. O'Donnell, 60 seconds to you.
I think that the best thing we can do is to empower the local organizations. Our government spends so much money on HIV care and research, and that's a good thing. However, in terms of seeing directly those statistics go down, we need to work with the local organizations that are working with the men and women who are impacted by these things for character development, for education, for outreach, to help people become aware of what we can do. Now, it is not the role of the federal government because we are simply too big and too bloated to understand the needs of the individual. So that's why I say this is something very important that should be taking place on the local level, empowering the organizations who do take on those things. When it comes to teen pregnancy, I sat on the board of Birthright, a local organization here in Delaware that addresses that through partnering with young women who have babies out of wedlock to give them what they need, the resources, economics, resources that they need, but not only that, to partner with them and mentor with them so that they can provide a better way of life for themselves.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Donnell. You're listening to 1150 AM, WDEL Wilmington, and WSDW HD3 Wilmington. It's 9 o'clock, and is there anything further we'd like to add on this particular question? Mr. Coons.
I'll simply say that, in my view, one of the most effective and admirable programs, to get back to our earlier conversation about faith-based programs and their possible appropriate role, Bethel AME Church in Wilmington runs a program called Beautiful Gate Ministries, which provides confidential, free HIV testing. So if there's anybody who's listening, I just like to lift them up as an organization that's done a great job at reaching out and trying to tackle this significant problem in our community. We also need to push back against the bigotry that historically has mischaracterized the origins, the causes, the impact of HIV/AIDS. I also frankly think we need to advance education. We need to empower parents to educate their children and to give them age-appropriate and a full range of tools to educate their children to reduce teen pregnancy and to make sure that those teens who do get pregnant get access to quality health care. Part of why I support the Affordable Care Act is its significant increase in preventive care, in wellness, and in supporting for the community health centers, exactly the sort of centers, whether it's Westside Health or other health centers in our community that have made a great impact in affecting all three of the issues that we're talking about.
Ms. O'Donnell, a final thought before we move on? Okay. WDEL's Alan Ludell. The question is yours.
The United States has formally declared war against foreign nations 5 separate times in our history, but not with recent wars. Depending on how you look at the Constitution, constitutional liberalism, etc., should a president be able to wage war without a formal congressional declaration of war? Or in another way, are you satisfied with the current system where the president asserts the constitutional authority to commit troops without the need for congressional approval, but the president gets congressional authorization that satisfies the provisions of the War Powers Act?
Ms. O'Donnell, 1 minute to you.
Sure.
It is true with 4 panelists and 2 people, if the same person gets the question. So, there's no problem with that. But
I thought that Mr. Coons had responded first last time. No?
Yes.
Not to my question. That's true.
Want to flip a coin for it? I don't really,
No, I think that's fair.
make a
I think if
judgment
you were
call
keeping a
about which
tally, I've been answering first on the majority of them, but it's going to be no different when I stand up in the U.S. Senate and have to go against my leadership and the party leadership. So I'm used to opposition, but I think out of fairness, we'll shoot this one to Coons.
I will say I admire my opponent's persistent willingness to take on and fight everyone, including the panel, me, our institutions.
60 seconds.
I'm not the one who asked for a
I think your question, Mr. Liddell, had to do with the War Powers Act and whether I believe it's appropriate for presidents to conduct war or operations close to war without congressional authorization. I think it is critical and enshrined in our Constitution that the Congress continue to play an appropriate oversight role. And in the cases where we've gone most badly off track in terms of the conduct of our military, it's where congressional oversight was only exercised long after the fact and where clear rules of engagement and a clear scope for the mission wasn't laid out at the outset. Obviously, in moments of crisis, in response to an attack on the United States, in moments when the supreme commander of our armed forces needs to act decisively and promptly, there may not be time for a broad congressional inquiry into the appropriateness of war or the scope of the war. But as a senator, I would repeatedly act to hold the president accountable, a president of either party, for their conduct of a war, for their conduct of foreign affairs, to make sure that they are in keeping with our most fundamental values and that they're effective in keeping us safe.
Very good. Ms. O'Donnell, 60 seconds to you.
I think when it comes to officially declaring a war, you're setting a whole new tone that may not always be necessary when our national interests are threatened. For the question of when should we use force, it's any time that our national interest is threatened. Specifically, what's on the voters' minds right now is in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the staging area for 9/11. It definitely impacted our national security, and we definitely had to respond with force. My opponent has said that he supports a random time withdrawal. I do not support that. He says that it's because he thinks that creating stability over there is unrealistic. Well, that's what his party said about Iraq. And because we were consistent and persistent and supported our men and women who are serving over there and risking their lives, we have seen stability and we have created a more safe environment. I think that if we randomly withdraw out of Afghanistan right now, we're simply going to embolden the terrorists to come after us even harder because we have not seen the benchmarks that need to be in place in Afghanistan before we leave.
All right, very good. Mr. Coons, anything further?
Ms. O'Donnell, would you just, one more time for us, lay out what those benchmarks are for success in Afghanistan?
Absolutely. We need to see a representative government that serves the needs of the people and that is able to defend its